The crystalline spires of Zephyria Prime gleamed under the pale blue sun, their surfaces reflecting the desperate activity within the Planetary Defense Center. Commander Vex High of the Galactic Coalition pressed his four-fingered hands against the tactical display, watching red dots multiply across the star map like a spreading infection. The Void Swarm had broken through the outer defense grid, and their bioships were heading straight for the core worlds. How many? Vex High asked, though he dreaded the answer. 17,000 confirmed contacts, replied his tactical officer, her voice trembling despite years of military training. More are emerging from dark space every minute. Our fleets are falling back on all fronts. The Void Swarm had appeared 3 cycles ago from the galactic rim, a massive collection of organic vessels that consumed everything in their path. They converted matter into more ships, more weapons, more of themselves. Every victory against them was Pyrrhic, as destroyed swarm vessels simply fed their growth elsewhere. Vex High's antennae twitched in frustration. The Coalition had tried everything. Their most advanced battleships barely scratched the swarm's living hulls. Quantum weapons were absorbed and converted into bioenergy. Even their experimental phase-shift bombs only delayed the inevitable advance. "Sir," called out Science Officer Talmora from her workstation, "I may have found something in the ancient archives." Vex High turned toward the young Altarian, whose blue-scaled face was illuminated by scrolling text on her screen. "Ancient archives? Now is hardly the time for archaeology. It's a summoning protocol, sir. Used by the predecessors during the Dark Tide Wars, over 50,000 years ago." Talmora's voice carried a note of excitement that seemed inappropriate given their circumstances. "They called it the last resort contingency. Summoning what exactly? Unknown entities from parallel dimensions. The records indicate they successfully called forth beings capable of turning the tide of impossible wars." She paused, her large eyes meeting his. "The translation is incomplete, but it mentions warriors from the realm of endless conflict, and those who have known only war since their birth among the stars." Vex High's tactical display chimed ominously. The swarm had broken through another defense line. 3 more worlds had gone dark in the past hour. Billions of lives, snuffed out or converted into biomass for the enemy's expansion. "What are the risks?" he asked. "Unknown, sir. The archives are fragmentary. But the predecessors survived the Dark Tide Wars, so the summoning must have worked." Talmora hesitated. "There are warnings about entities beyond our understanding, and something about the price of salvation. But the context is lost." The bridge fell silent except for the steady stream of distress calls flooding their communications. Entire star systems were crying out for help that wouldn't come. The Coalition Navy was retreating on all fronts, buying time that was running out faster than anyone wanted to admit. "How long would it take to prepare this summoning?" Vex High asked. "The ritual requires precise stellar alignments and massive energy expenditure. We'd need to channel the output of 3 solar collection arrays through the ancient amplification chambers beneath the surface." Talmora checked her calculations again. "All this stop, approximately 6 standard hours, assuming we can find enough qualified technicians who understand predecessor technology. 6 hours. Vex High looked at the tactical display again. At their current rate of advance, the swarm would reach the core worlds in 4 days. If this summoning could bring allies capable of stopping them, it was worth the risk. "Do it," he commanded. "Authorization code Omega-77. Initiate the last resort contingency." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Ancient machinery that hadn't been activated in millennia groaned to life in the depths of Zephyria Prime. Technicians worked frantically to decipher predecessor control systems, while engineers rerouted power from across the planet. The very air hummed with building energy as massive capacitors charged with the fury of captured stars. Talmora stood before the primary summoning array, a complex arrangement of crystalline formations that seemed to bend light in impossible ways. The chamber around them was vast, carved from living rock by beings who had mastered forces the Coalition barely understood. Glyphs along the walls glowed with increasing intensity as the ritual approached its climax. "Energy levels at 90%, reported one of the technicians. "The stellar alignment will be optimal in 30 minutes. Vex High watched from the observation deck, his stomach churning with a mixture of hope and terror. What were they about to unleash upon the galaxy? The predecessors had been advanced beyond imagination, yet even they had resorted to summoning unknown entities to save their civilization. What did that say about the nature of the forces they were calling? "Sir, we're receiving reports from the front lines," his aide whispered urgently. "The swarm has accelerated their advance. They'll reach the Centauri cluster in 2 days, not 4. 2 days. Vex's High closed his eyes and tried to calculate the millions of lives that would be lost if this desperate gambit failed. The coalition had 47 member species across thousands of worlds. If the summoning brought nothing but empty space, they would all fall to the endless hunger of the Void Swarm. "Beginning final preparations," Talmora announced. "All personnel to minimum safe distance." The crystalline array began to resonate, producing a sound that seemed to bypass the ears and vibrate directly in their bones. Reality itself appeared to shimmer around the formation, as if the fabric of space-time was being stretched thin. Energy readings spiked beyond the scales, forcing technicians to shield their instruments. "Stellar alignment achieved," someone called out. "Initiating dimensional breach in 10, 9, 8. Vex High held his breath, watching as the air above the array began to twist and fold. Whatever was about to happen would determine the fate of countless civilizations. 3, 2, 1. A brilliant flash filled the chamber, forcing everyone to shield their eyes. When the light faded, a swirling portal hung in the air above the array, its edges crackling with exotic energies. Through its depths, they could see stars, but not their stars. The constellations were wrong, alien, arranged in patterns that hurt to contemplate. For a moment, nothing happened. The portal simply hung there, showing glimpses of an unknown cosmos. Then Vex High heard something that made his blood run cold. A sound like distant thunder, growing steadily closer. "Are those engines?" whispered one of the technicians. The thunder became a roar, and shapes began to emerge from the portal. Massive, angular forms that dwarfed the largest coalition battleships, hull plating that gleamed with the dull sheen of functional metal rather than decorative aesthetics, weapon arrays that bristled with obvious intent. "By the ancestors," Talmora breathed. "How many ships are coming through?" The first vessel to fully emerge was a kilometer-long behemoth, its hull scarred by countless battles. Gun turrets the size of buildings tracked across their surroundings with mechanical precision. Behind it came another ship, then another, then dozens more. The portal stretched wider, accommodating larger and larger vessels. Vex's High's communications officer suddenly straightened. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the lead vessel. Audio only, but it's being translated by the portal's energy field somehow." "Put it through." A voice filled the chamber. Deep, gravelly, unmistakably predatory. It spoke in accented tones that suggested a species accustomed to conflict. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Force. Commanding Task Force Retribution. We received your distress call through the dimensional breach. What's your situation down there?" The humans had arrived, and they had brought an entire fleet. Vex High stared at the growing armada emerging from the portal, his mind struggling to process what was happening. Each new ship was a study in efficient lethality, built for war rather than exploration or diplomacy. These weren't peaceful explorers or merchants. They were warriors, just as the ancient texts had promised. "Respond, sir," prompted his communications officer. Vex High found his voice with effort. "This is Commander Vex High of the Galactic Coalition Defense Force. We are under attack by an overwhelming enemy force. Our situation is..." He paused, watching another massive warship clear the portal. "Desperate." "Understood, Commander. We're reading massive hostile fleet movements on our sensors. Transmit tactical data and enemy capabilities. Task Force Retribution is moving to intercept." As if summoned by those words, dozens more ships poured through the portal. Sleek destroyers, massive carriers, ships of classes Vex High couldn't even identify. The humans hadn't just sent a response team, they had sent a war fleet. The portal continued to expand, and still more ships emerged. Vex High realized with growing amazement that this wasn't even the full extent of human naval power. This was just what they had ready to deploy through an untested dimensional gateway into an unknown situation. What kind of species traveled the stars with fleets like this ready at a moment's notice? His question would be answered soon enough. The Void Swarm was about to encounter something they had never faced before. Beings who had spent their entire existence fighting wars among the stars, who had turned conflict into an art form, and who had just arrived in force to face a new enemy. The real battle was about to begin. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the UTS Indomitable, watching the tactical display update with information from the Coalition's databases. The Void Swarm was unlike anything in the Terran Defense Force's extensive enemy catalog, but that didn't concern her. Humanity had faced the unknown before and emerged victorious. "Ma'am, we've completed our analysis of the enemy fleet composition," reported her tactical officer, Lieutenant Commander Torres. 17,000 bioships of varying sizes, moving in coordinated swarms. Their technology appears to be organic-based, with rapid regeneration capabilities. Sarah studied the data streams flowing across her screens. The Coalition's previous engagements showed a disturbing pattern. Conventional weapons barely scratched the enemy hulls, and destroyed vessels somehow contributed to the growth of nearby swarm ships. It was a nightmare scenario that would have broken most civilizations. Fortunately, humanity wasn't most civilizations. "Contact the fleet commanders," she ordered. "I want a full tactical conference in 30 minutes. And get me a direct line to this Commander Vex High. We need detailed intelligence before we engage." The main screen shifted to show the Coalition commander, whose alien features couldn't quite hide his amazement at the human fleet deployment. Sarah had to admit she understood his reaction. Task Force Retribution represented less than 8% of the Terran Navy's active strength. Yet it still numbered over 300 vessels of various classes. "Commander Vex High, I need you to brief my tactical staff on everything you know about the Void Swarm. Capabilities, weaknesses, behavioral patterns. How did they appear, and what have they done to your worlds?" The alien officer's antennae twitched in what Sarah's cultural database suggested was anxiety. "Admiral Chen, I must warn you, we've thrown everything at them. Our most advanced weapons, experimental technologies, even our strategic reserves. Nothing has worked. They adapt to our attacks and use our own destroyed ships to fuel their growth." "That's noted, Commander, but I need specifics. What's their energy source? How do they coordinate across such vast distances? What happens to captured populations?" Over the next 20 minutes, Vex High provided a comprehensive briefing that painted a grim picture. The Void Swarm consumed entire biospheres, converting organic matter into ship components and fuel. They showed no interest in communication or negotiation. Their vessels regenerated damage rapidly, unless completely destroyed. And even then, the biomass was somehow recycled into nearby ships. Sarah listened with professional attention, making notes and asking pointed questions. Her years of experience fighting the Confederation wars had taught her to look for patterns others missed. Every enemy had weaknesses, even if they weren't immediately obvious. "What about their command structure?" she asked. "Are there capital ships, flagships, anything that seems to coordinate the others? We've identified larger vessels that appear to direct smaller groups, but destroying them only causes temporary disruption. The swarms reorganize within hours." "Interesting." Sarah pulled up the fleet disposition on her secondary screen. "Commander, I'm going to need you to evacuate all Coalition forces from the contested sectors. My ships operate under different tactical doctrines than yours, and I don't want any friendly fire incidents." Vex High's expression showed confusion. "Admiral, with respect, our combined fleets might have a chance if we coordinate our attacks. Your ships are impressive, but the swarm has numerical superiority of nearly 50 to 1. Sarah smiled, and something in that expression made the alien officer take a step back from his communication screen. "Commander, you summoned us because your conventional approach wasn't working. Let us handle this our way." She cut the connection and turned to her staff officers. "Initial assessment? Fascinating enemy," replied Captain Martinez. her chief of staff. They've essentially created a perfect counter to standard coalition tactics. Overwhelming numbers, adaptive defense, resource conversion. No wonder they've been winning. But they've never faced human military doctrine, added Commander Kim from Intelligence. Their adaptation appears to be reactive rather than predictive. They counter what they've already encountered, not what they might encounter. Sarah nodded approvingly. Her staff was thinking along the right lines. Tactical recommendations? Hit them with something they've never seen before, suggested Torres. The coalition has been using energy weapons and conventional kinetics. We have options they don't. Agreed. What about their coordination methods? Still analyzing, but initial scans suggest some kind of quantum entanglement network, reported Lieutenant Park from the science station. Very sophisticated, but potentially vulnerable to the right kind of interference. Sarah pulled up the fleet roster on her command screen. Task Force Retribution was composed of vessels from 6 different human stellar powers, each bringing their own specialized technologies. The Mars Protectorate had contributed their latest stealth frigates. Europa's shipyards had provided heavy assault carriers. The Titan Collective had sent their experimental gravity manipulation ships. Most importantly, Earth herself had deployed 3 of her newest dreadnoughts, equipped with weapons that existed nowhere else in the galaxy. All ships. This is Admiral Chen. Prepare for immediate departure. We're moving to engage the Void Swarm at the Centauri cluster. Execute Battle Plan Omega. The human fleet began to move with practiced precision. Unlike the Coalition's tendency toward formation flying and coordinated broadsides, the human ships spread out in seemingly random patterns. Some accelerated ahead at maximum speed while others held back. Several vessels simply vanished from sensors, their stealth systems engaging. Commander Vex High watched from his observation post on Zephyria Prime, trying to understand human tactics. It looked like chaos, but his tactical computers insisted there was an underlying pattern too complex for Coalition systems to analyze. "Sir," reported his communications officer, "the human fleet has just achieved faster-than-light travel, using methods our sensors can't identify. They'll reach the Centauri cluster in 12 hours. 12 hours. The Coalition's fastest ships would need 3 days to make the same journey. How had humanity developed such advanced propulsion technology while still being unknown to galactic civilization? The answer came 6 hours later when the first reports reached them from the contested zone. The Void Swarm had been advancing on the heavily populated Centauri system, their bioships preparing to consume 3 industrial worlds. Then, the humans had arrived. "Admiral Chen is transmitting on general frequencies," announced the communications officer. "She wants all Coalition forces to observe and learn." The main screen switched to an external view from a stealth probe near the battle zone. What Vex High saw defied his understanding of space warfare. The human fleet wasn't engaging in traditional ship-to-ship combat. Instead, they were using tactics that seemed impossible. Ships phased in and out of normal space, appearing behind enemy vessels, and disappearing before return fire could target them. Weapons that twisted space-time itself created localized gravitational anomalies that crushed swarm ships into singularities. But the most terrifying aspect was the systematic nature of the attack. While some human ships engaged the main swarm forces, others were specifically targeting the bioships that carried the resource conversion systems. They had identified the critical components of swarm operations within hours and were methodically eliminating them. "By the ancestors," whispered Talmora. "Look at their kill ratios." The numbers were staggering. In 30 minutes of engagement, the humans had destroyed over 400 swarm vessels, while losing only 3 of their own. But more importantly, the destroyed bioships weren't regenerating or feeding nearby vessels. Whatever weapons the humans were using prevented the swarm's adaptive recycling. "How are they doing that?" Vex High demanded. His science officer was studying the sensor readings with wide eyes. "They're not just destroying the ships, sir. They're unmaking them, converting the organic matter into base elements that can't be reprocessed. It's like they're using entropy itself as a weapon." On the screen, a massive swarm biocruiser, the type that had shrugged off Coalition battleship fire, simply ceased to exist as a human dreadnought, fired something that looked like a beam of nothingness. The space where the enemy ship had been showed, no debris, No energy signature, nothing at all. Admiral Chen, this is Commander Vex High. What kind of weapons are those? The human admiral's voice came through clearly despite the battle raging around her ship. Vacuum decay generators, Commander. We learned a long time ago that sometimes you have to make your enemies stop existing rather than just destroying them. Vacuum decay generators. The term sent chills through every coalition officer who heard it. Vacuum decay was a theoretical process that could unravel matter at the quantum level, potentially destroying entire star systems if uncontrolled. These humans were using it as a standard naval weapon. The battle continued for another hour, but the outcome was never in doubt. The Void Swarm, which had seemed unstoppable against coalition forces, was being systematically dismantled by human tactics and technology. Their numerical advantage meant nothing when human ships could phase in and out of normal space at will. Their adaptive defenses were useless against weapons that operated on principles they had never encountered. Most telling of all, the swarm began to retreat. For the first time since their appearance, the bioships turned away from a target and fled back toward the galactic rim. All enemy forces are withdrawing from the Centauri cluster, reported Admiral Chen. We're pursuing to ensure they don't regroup. Commander Vex High, we'll need to discuss long-term strategic planning. This was just the opening engagement. As the human fleet disappeared in pursuit of the fleeing swarm, Vex High realized that his desperate summoning had brought more than just allies. Humanity represented a paradigm shift in galactic warfare, a species that had spent so long fighting among the stars that they had developed military technologies beyond coalition comprehension. The Void Swarm had been defeated in a single engagement, something that would have taken coalition forces months to achieve, if it were possible at all. But watching the casual efficiency with which the humans had deployed weapons capable of unraveling matter itself, Vex High couldn't help but wonder if they had solved one problem only to create a potentially larger one. What kind of civilization developed vacuum decay weapons for routine naval use? And what would happen when the immediate threat was eliminated and humanity turned their attention to their new galactic neighbors? The ancient texts had warned about the price of salvation. Vex High was beginning to understand what the predecessors had meant. 3 weeks after the Battle of Centauri Cluster, Commander Vex High found himself aboard the UTS Indomitable, trying to understand how his universe had fundamentally changed. The human flagship was unlike anything in the Coalition's experience. Every surface designed for function, rather than aesthetics. Every system optimized for combat efficiency. Admiral Chen met him in her ready room, a spartanly furnished space dominated by tactical displays and star charts. The human leader looked exactly like someone who had spent decades fighting wars among the stars, scarred, competent, and utterly comfortable with the machinery of conflict. The Void Swarm has been completely eliminated, she reported without preamble. We tracked them back to their origin point in dark space and sterilized their breeding facilities. The threat to your civilization is over. Vex High felt a moment of relief so intense it was almost painful. Billions of lives saved, dozens of worlds preserved from consumption. The desperate gambit had worked beyond his wildest hopes, but looking at the human admiral, he sensed there was more to discuss. However, Chen continued, confirming his suspicions, we need to address the larger situation. The portal between our dimensions is stable but not permanent. We estimate it will collapse naturally within 6 months, unless actively maintained. You're going to leave? The question came out more plaintive than Vex High had intended. That depends on several factors. Chen pulled up a holographic display showing the local galactic arm. My intelligence officers have been analyzing coalition records and communications. Your civilization is peaceful, prosperous, and completely unprepared for serious military threats. The tactical display highlighted dozens of potential danger zones, regions of unexplored space, ancient ruins of unknown civilizations, energy signatures that suggested other extragalactic entities. Vex High realized with growing unease that the coalition had been living in a protective bubble, assuming their small section of the galaxy represented the norm. The Void Swarm wasn't a random occurrence, Chen explained. Our xenobiologists believe they were a scouting force, possibly one of many sent by a larger civilization to test galactic defenses. Their rapid retreat, when faced with serious resistance, Suggests they were gathering intelligence for something bigger. Vex High's antennae drooped. You're saying there might be worse threats out there? I'm saying there definitely are worse threats out there. The galaxy is a dangerous place, Commander. My people learned that lesson over centuries of conflict. Chen gestured toward the star map. Your coalition controls maybe 3% of galactic space, all of it in relatively safe sectors. The other 97% contains things that would make the Void Swarm look like a minor nuisance. The implications were staggering. The coalition had built their entire civilization on the assumption that space was largely empty, populated only by occasional asteroid fields and dead worlds. The idea that vast regions might harbor actively hostile entities was almost incomprehensible. What are you proposing? Vex High asked. A mutual defense agreement. Humans know how to fight wars, but we're not explorers or diplomats. Your people know how to build stable societies and manage peaceful expansion. Together, we could secure this region of the galaxy and maybe push back some of the darkness. Chen activated another display, showing human fleet positions throughout coalition space. Vex High was startled to realize that during their conversation about the Void Swarm, human ships had quietly dispersed to defensive positions around every major coalition world. You've already begun, he observed. We protect our allies, Commander. That's what military forces do. Chen's expression softened slightly. But we won't impose ourselves on unwilling partners. If the coalition votes to refuse our assistance, we'll withdraw to our dimension and seal the portal behind us. You'll never see us again. The offer was simultaneously generous and terrifying. Human protection would guarantee coalition security against external threats. But at what cost? These people wielded weapons that could unmake matter itself and treated vacuum decay as a standard military tool. What would you want in return? Basing rights for our fleets, access to coalition industrial facilities for maintenance and repairs, and formal recognition as allies rather than occupying forces. Chen paused. We're not conquerors. Vex High. We have our own territory and our dimension, but we are warriors, and warriors need a purpose beyond simple survival. Over the following days, Vex High toured human facilities and observed their personnel in action. What he found challenged every assumption the coalition had held about military cultures. Yes, humans were incredibly efficient at violence, but they were also highly disciplined, surprisingly intellectual, and genuinely protective of civilian populations. He watched human engineers work alongside coalition technicians to improve planetary defense systems. The humans didn't simply impose their technology. They adapted it to work with existing coalition infrastructure, creating hybrid systems that were more effective than either approach alone. More importantly, he observed how human military personnel interacted with coalition civilians. There was no swagger, no intimidation, no sense of superiority. The humans seemed to understand that their role was protection, not domination. Your people are not what I expected, he told Admiral Chen during their final meeting. What did you expect? Conquerors, aggressive expansionists, species that develop weapons like yours usually want to use them for territorial gain. Chen nodded thoughtfully. We tried that approach once, back when we were confined to a single star system. Humans fought each other for thousands of years before we learned to direct our aggression outward. We've had plenty of practice distinguishing between enemies and potential allies. She pulled up one final display, showing long-range sensor contacts beyond coalition space. Dozens of unknown signatures, some moving with clear intelligence, others following migration patterns that suggested vast nomadic civilizations. The universe is full of predators, Vex High. Some of them make the Void Swarm look primitive. Your people summoned us because you needed warriors, and we answered because that's what we do. But this can't be a one-time arrangement. Either we establish a permanent alliance, or you'll face the next threat alone. The vote was held across all coalition worlds, with every member species participating. The debate was intense, fear of human military power balanced against the clear evidence of protective intent. Some argued that humanity represented a greater long-term threat than any external enemy. Others pointed out that external enemies were guaranteed, while human intentions could potentially be managed through diplomacy. In the end, the choice was made by practical necessity rather than abstract philosophy. The coalition had been shown how dangerous their galaxy truly was, and they knew they couldn't face those dangers alone. The Mutual Defense Pact was signed on Zephyria Prime, in the same chamber where the desperate summoning had been performed. Admiral Chen and the Coalition Council representatives affixed their signatures to a document that would reshape galactic politics for centuries to come. To new allies and old enemies, Chen said, raising a glass of human whiskey. To those who answer the call, replied Vex High, lifting his own glass of Altarian wine. As they drank, the portal between dimensions stabilized into a permanent gateway. Human ships would patrol Coalition space, ready to face whatever emerged from the dark between stars. Coalition worlds would provide the industrial and logistical support needed to maintain such a vast defensive network. But more than that, both civilizations would grow stronger through contact with the other. Humans would learn that there were ways of building society beyond military necessity. The Coalition would discover that strength and peace were not mutually exclusive concepts. The ancient texts had spoken of the price of salvation, but Vex High was beginning to think the predecessors had been wrong about one thing. Sometimes the price of salvation was not a burden to be endured, but an opportunity to become something greater than you were before. Outside the chamber windows, human patrol ships moved in formation with Coalition vessels, their crews learning to work together despite radically different backgrounds and capabilities. It was a sight that would have been impossible just weeks ago. Predator and prey becoming partners in the face of greater threats. The galaxy was still dangerous, still full of unknown enemies and ancient terrors. But now it faced them with a new alliance, one that combined Coalition wisdom with human strength. The Void Swarm had been defeated, but more importantly, two civilizations had found in each other what they had been missing. The humans had found a cause worth protecting. The Coalition had found guardians worthy of trust. And in the depths of space, where things older than both civilizations stirred in response to the changing balance of power, new threats began to take notice of the alliance that had just been born. The Void Swarm had been a test, a probe to measure galactic resistance. That test had failed dramatically, but the entities behind it were already adapting, already planning new approaches. The next conflict would require everything both species had learned from each other, but that would be a challenge for another day. For now, humans and Coalition members worked side by side, building defenses and forging friendships that would define the future of their corner of the galaxy. The accidental summoning had become something far greater than anyone had intended. And perhaps that was the most human thing of all. Turning a desperate mistake into an opportunity for mutual growth and protection. The stars themselves seemed brighter with the knowledge that they were no longer alone in the darkness.